hyperfocus, procrastination, time management issues, forgetfulness. I mean, these are the things you probably think about when it comes to ADHD. If you have ADHD, these are the things that are the most obvious to others. And if you're someone who knows folks with ADHD, these are the things that you're usually gonna see. Now, there are issues that lay way beneath the surface that a lot of people don't talk about. And that's what I want to bring light to in this video, because nothing is worse than suffering in isolation. And then when people don't know what's going on beneath the surface, especially the outsider perspective, a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of bad things can happen. So in this video, I want to talk about what those hidden things are and what we can do about them. Now, you might be wondering, well, can you tell me what those are? Absolutely. And that's what we're going to do. But real quick, if you've not been here before, let me at least introduce myself. My name is Matt. I'm a therapist in private practice. I own a group practice called Progress Therapy, stylized as PRGRS. We are located in New York City. We serve people throughout the state of New York, and we specialize in ADHD. And this is why we like to make videos all about ADHD to educate folks about ADHD. Now, I've said ADHD way too many times, all right? But let's jump into the video because I don't want to play any games here and no long introductions. All right, so here we are at my handy dandy semi-hand-drawn slides. And so what am I talking about? Oh, I can barely work these slides. Nope, oh man, all right. Oh man, it's disappearing. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, I was gonna have like some amazing introduction with the slides zooming in, but that was not gonna work. All right, so the loop that no one talks about. And so, like I just said, the things you most likely see are these, right? Procrastination, being late, forgetfulness. This is just a couple of things, right? But what no one actually talks about is this right here: shame and guilt. And I'm talking from the perspective of someone who has ADHD, right? So many of the folks we work with don't talk about this out in the open, right? But when we get to know them and talk to them, a lot of shame and a lot of guilt starts to build up. And we're going to talk more about why this happens and what we can do about it. But the issue here is that when this begins to happen, when shame and guilt begin to take place, now we're just adding another layer of difficulty on top of these things up here, which are already difficult to deal with, these executive function problems. And now on top of that, or in this picture, it's below it, we have this shame and guilt layer that we need to begin working through and thinking through, okay? And, you know, I have a couple comments down here like, yeah, this is real. People really deal with shame and guilt when it comes to ADHD. When I say documented, you know, these, you know, in the literature and the research for ADHD, you'll see this come up. And then this is what we're going to talk about later. But, you know, when there's a misunderstanding about these things here, procrastination, forgetfulness, some people call this laziness or you just don't care. And that adds to the shame and guilt. And these things are not true. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. Okay. But what I really want to talk about is that these, like the actual executive function problems, the layer of shame and guilt, a loop gets created. Right? And this can be very difficult for someone to come out of. But the good news is the loop is definitely breakable. Okay. But before we talk about breaking the loop, let's actually look at what the loop is. So let's use an example. Let's imagine someone with ADHD is in class or at work in a meeting, and they're being given an assignment or a task they need to complete, a project, if you will. Right? Now, one common issue when it comes to ADHD is missing details, either because focus, you know, it's hard to focus, or they forget, whatever the case may be. So we might miss a detail, and it could be a crucial detail, right? Now, what happens when we miss a detail of an assignment, like the due date or a particular step, something like that? There's real impacts, right? So if we're in school, we might not do well on the assignment. We might fail the class. We might, you know, there's all these repercussions that can happen. If it's work and we miss a detail, right? Again, same thing. Well, we're not failing, you know, you might not fail a class at work, but maybe you know, you could let go of your job. You could, you know, there could be a negative outcome because the project didn't work out, whatever the case may be. Or maybe we're, you know, if we kind of sway away from the work in school, maybe we miss details, you know, in our relationships or our friends or our loved ones. They tell us things, they ask things of us, and we forget often. And so then maybe it's a birthday or something like that. And then what happens is the relationship gets negatively impacted. So what I'm highlighting here is that we have this executive function issue, right? We're missing details. And then we have the repercussions hit usually all the domains: school, work, relationship, and others. And then what happens The person with ADHD, what we see often happen is they will kind of ask themselves, or they'll say to themselves, why is this happening again? Right? And oh man, I can't believe this is happening again. So there's a reaction, right, to the issue happening again. And it's not the first time, right? It's something that usually happens over and over again. And then what happens is the person will experience a lot of shame, a lot of guilt in this context. But what we notice is that sometimes shame and guilt fuel a response like this. I will just try harder next time, or I'll do better next time, something like this. And it's a statement that comes from a place of truth. People want to do better. They want to try harder, but it often doesn't work, right? And then what happens? We miss the detail again, same repercussion over and over. And then this loop, the more times this loop goes around, the greater the shame and the guilt become. Right? And this is a loop we see very, very often in our practice. And then again, as the loop goes around, the shame and guilt build, and it feels like that loop is impossible to break. Okay, so we'll see that occur very, very often in the practice. The good news is there's a few ways that we can begin breaking this loop, and I'm going to propose 2. Okay, so let's go over to this slide here. You might be wondering, what the heck is this slide? All right, so one major way we can begin breaking this is through what I would call acceptance. Now, I was going to put this as the last slide because some of you might already click off when I say that word, okay? But number one, acceptance is not about giving up. It's not about giving in, right? It's not about that. When I talk about acceptance, I'm coming from the DBT perspective, okay? And simply put, this is focusing on what we can change and not focusing on what you can't change, okay? And we're gonna give an example to really bring this to life. But at the end of the day, when it comes to acceptance in ADHD, there's one thing we have to keep in mind, okay? Number one is ADHD is real, okay? It is a real issue with real impacts on people. And when we say something like, well, I'll just try harder next time, or, I'll make sure that doesn't happen again, we're often not kind of thinking about this, that ADHD it does have an actual impact on people, right? It's affecting people's executive functions, right? And trying harder is that's not, right? That would negate this. So one layer of acceptance is recognizing that ADHD is real. Most of us can get behind that. And then accepting the real impacts it has on us. Now, hear me out. This is not about just saying, well, that is what it is. I'll just kind of be stuck in that cycle forever. Absolutely not. But we have to start here. Now, let me tell you why. Let me give you this example. So let's imagine we like to hike, okay? We like to hike, and we've planned for Saturday to go on a hike, okay? And here we are. We wake up Saturday morning. We're all excited, and it is raining. This is my attempt at making clouds here, right? And it's raining, and clearly we're most likely not going to be going on a hike. We thought it was going to be sunny. That's what the forecast said, but we wake up. It's downpouring. The person who gets stuck, right? The person who's not accepting might say something like, this shouldn't be happening. I can't believe this. Why is this happening? It said it was going to be sunny. I can't believe it. And this kind of gets repeated over and over again. Okay. And then a couple of things that might happen to this person, ways that we see people get stuck in these kind of situations, myself included, right? Well, I'll just pretend that it'll clear up. I think the rain will pass, but the forecast says that most likely won't happen. We know that's not likely, but it makes us feel better in the moment. It will clear up. I'll just wait it out. Or what we'll do is we'll replay what could have been. Wow, this is going to be a great day. I can't believe this. Oh my gosh, I was going to have the best hike of my life. All these kinds of things. But we replay what we could have had over and over again. And then the thing that happens mostly, it's very common, is just continuously in different ways saying, this shouldn't be happening. I can't believe this. This shouldn't have happened. Why is it raining? And people will go through this kind of thing like over and over and over again, right? And so imagine you want to go the hike, and so now we're stuck, right? We can't believe it. Oh my gosh, it could have been great. We're stuck. We're not going anywhere. We're just kind of sitting inside. And at some point, right, we're not making any motion. Now we go to the person who is a little bit more accepting in this situation. So they wake up, it's the same storm, right? Nothing's different. They're both experiencing the rain. They both plan for hikes. This person is upset, and that's okay, right? Being upset is part of it. It's accepting does not mean we're going to be okay with everything or just be like, yeah, that's fine. No, this person's also upset. But instead of getting stuck in this kind of dialogue here, this person is acknowledging the reality that it's raining, but then posing a different question. Well, with that reality in mind, what can I do? And what can happen? Now, there's a kind of a bit of a path forward. Again, none of this might be the person's first choice, but nonetheless, there are paths forward. Maybe they could think about hiking in the rain, right? Not perfect, but possible, depending on the conditions. Maybe they can reschedule and find a different time to go. Or maybe they can use the day that they had planned for hiking for something else. And what you can tell, again, none of that might be ideal, but this person isn't stuck. They're able to move forward with the different solutions that they've thought about. And again, we're not talking about giving up and just laying down and saying, well, yeah, that is what it is. It's whatever, right? And we're not talking about toxic positivity, right? This person isn't jumping for joy and finding the silver lining, quote unquote, right? But this person is saying, it's raining. I don't like it, but that's the reality. So what can I do with that reality in mind? And so now this person is living kind of more in this acceptance mindset, right? And the important part to remember here is that when we have the acceptance mindset, we open up a path forward, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about in just a second, or some of the ways we can actually work to improve our executive functions and work on those things. But the first thing I want people to really consider is this acceptance. And what that starts with is learning about ADHD. What is it? What are the real impacts? What does the research say? What are the symptoms? You know, these kinds of things. I think that's where acceptance can start, right? If you haven't done so already, do some real reading, real research. Learn more about ADHD. Read widely and broadly from different perspectives, all right? And then from there, we can begin to say, okay, well, this is what ADHD is. This is the impact, right? This is what I'm living with, or this is what that person's living with. And with that reality in mind, how do we move forward? Okay, that's probably the harder one to kind of think about. But let's move to this one here, which is going to be more of a practical strategy. Now, when it comes to ADHD, again, it's very real. It impacts our executive functions. And so what we have to kind of think about is what executive functions are, what's the impact, and then how do we outsource our executive functions? Okay, now one thing to really remember here is that ADHD is not about not knowing what to do. Most folks with ADHD know exactly what they need to do. They need to focus more, they need to pay attention more, they need to not forget as much, they need to remember, they know the skills and tools perhaps. It's not about not knowing what to do, it's about not doing what you know. And this is largely a motivation issue that is impacted by that's related to executive functions. Okay, now executive functions, I'm using the EF here, so you might hear me say EF. I have other videos on executive functions, but to put it simply, executive functions are essentially skills that we have that help us achieve future goals, right? So for example, memory, the ability to prioritize, setting goals, focusing, you know, all these kinds of things are examples of executive function. And we know that ADHD impacts executive function, right? So our ability to focus, our ability to remember, our ability to prioritize, all of that is impacted by ADHD. So one way we can actually improve significantly is not so much by finding all these different hacks and tools that people say are really good, but the first thing we have to kind of think about is what executive functions, and now when it comes to ADHD, generally speaking, most of the executive functions are impacted, but everyone's different, everyone has a different life experience. So you want to think about, you know, where are some of your major pain points? Right? So are you constantly forgetting details, right? So maybe that's the example we used before. Maybe I'm always forgetting details in meetings or in class, right? Or maybe I'm late to everything. That's causing my biggest issue. Maybe it's prioritizing, right? I don't do the right thing at the right time. And so then what we want to kind of think about is how do we externalize our executive functions? So let's think about memory, for example. A really good thing we can do is put Post-it notes in different places. Right? Again, this is just an example, but if we are having a hard time remembering something, right? So maybe we forget our lunch every day, or we forget our schoolwork or our assignment, whatever it is, we forget something every day. We can then take a really bright colored Post-it note and place it on our steering wheel, on our bathroom mirror, somewhere. And what are we doing effectively? We're outsourcing executive functions. Okay, and that's the crux of it. We are taking our memory and we're going to stop trying to just do it up here, right? We're going to actually externalize it. Time, a really simple example is a clock, right? So maybe we get a clock in our space where we are doing most of our work, right? One that we can see the passage of time. Timers that kind of, again, show the passage of time. This is externalizing executive functions and prioritizing in memory, right? So again, we could have notebooks, we could have planners, I mean, all that kind of stuff. And the specific tool itself is a means to an end, but what it has to be founded on is this idea of externalizing executive functions, right? That's what makes the actual skill helpful, all right? And over time, we're going to develop a whole bunch of tools, right? And tools eventually wear out, they don't work as good. And so we'll have to have kind of a recurring toolbox, right? Or skills and tools that we're constantly replenishing or tweaking or whatever the case may be, right? But again, the big thing for you to remember is that we kind of think about this from an executive function standpoint and externalizing those executive functions, okay? And with all of this in mind, I wanted to challenge you this week with something to do, all right? The first thing I want you to do is identify your common pain points, right? So maybe you're someone, forgetting things, right? Or maybe you've had troubles prioritizing. I want you to just write it out. What are some of the major pain points you're dealing with, okay? And then what I want you to think about is like, well, what is the executive function underneath it, right? So if you're always forgetting, memory, right? If you have trouble with time management, it's, kind of keeping a time in your mind and estimating how long time will be, right? These kinds of things. And then from there, I want you to think creatively about a way to externalize it. I gave you some examples, right? A clock or a Post-it note, right? These are more simplified versions, but you can get really creative with this. And so I want you to think about how do you externalize that executive function that is causing the issue, right? That you identify the pain point the pain point. And so now again, what we're gonna have is we're building up a toolkit. And as we build up a toolkit, there's more things that we can do, right? Rather than this right here, I will just try harder next time. We're gonna have a toolkit of different things we can try instead of, right, just trying harder but not actually doing anything. We're gonna have something we can put here, okay? And the more we can do that, the more chances we have to break this cycle. Just remember, ADHD is real, right? It has real impact on us, okay? And then each tool you add, again, is one more chance to break the cycle and to avoid shame creeping in. Okay, so at the end of the day, I really wanted to make this video, number one, to highlight that people with ADHD do deal with shame and guilt. And people without ADHD who might have loved ones or friends or whoever who have ADHD, I really need to understand that so that they can understand more, they could that's just going to help us all. Right? And so the more people understand about the complexity of the ADHD, right, from the surface level executive function issues all the way to the deeper levels of shame and guilt, it's going to benefit everyone. And hopefully this video is a starting point for you to learn a bit more. I hope this video is helpful for you. I hope you learned something. If you're ever interested in working with our practice, you can click the link down below to check out our website. But until then, I will see you in the next video.